attend today. And we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover. So, welcome to everyone who has joined us. My name is Natalie. I'm the Executive Director of Recenter Race and Equity in Education. We are a 32-year-old Hartford-based community nonprofit doing the work and doing the work under attack in this moment because anyone who is standing up for justice and liberation is literally finding themselves and their organizations and this work under attack in a variety of ways. And we're going to get into those today. But welcome to this space, to this panel. We'll start with intros, but we're going to introduce ourselves and also make an offering of something that we are focused on in our own learning in this moment, because I think everything today should be a modeling of all of the brilliance that is in the space. So as I enter, many of you know I am a white Puerto Rican, cis hetero, non-disabled person with significant class privilege. Recently learned that I hail from the island of floating garbage. So there we go. And also my offering to you is that I am really learning more and combating my own historical illiteracy about Indigenous peoples in general, but the Indigenous peoples of Puerto Rico or Boriquen, right? Multiple names, right? The Isla of Floating Basura también, pero when I think about the way that I learned about Indigenous folk, and when I think about the performative land acknowledgements that we are all invited to do all of the time, right, I feel a deep accountability to growing my own understanding and knowledge. So part of what we have curated for you is a resource garden that we're going to pump in the chat, share with you later. You'll get it in multiple forms. But read the commitments that I've made to better connecting with indigeneity as something that I am personally working on, redistributing my own income to Indigenous-led organizations so that my land acknowledgement has some oomph behind it. It actually means something, some accountability. That is my offering. I have an amazing crew of colleagues here. Lonice, I will start with you if you want to introduce yourself and then make an offering of your own learning at this time.
Thank you. Yes, I am Lonice Eversley. I'm a master teacher in the South Bronx. This is my 26th year of teaching. I approach my profession with radical love, to quote the great Yolanda Seeley Ruiz. And it is my intention today that as we delve into this conversation about equity and about justice for our young people, that we center them, right? We remember them. And there's a great deal that happens within a system, within any system, but particularly in the system of education that was designed to do exactly what it's doing right now. And so what I want to make sure we do is to keep in mind that while our babies are not reading the way they should be reading, they're not doing math the way they should be doing math, they're not ready for the world when they graduate, that we can disrupt and dismantle systems. And so that's what I am here to represent today. As a disruptor and a dismantler of systems that are not working in service to our Black and Latinx students in New York City.
Thank you so much, Lonice. And Dr. Khalya Hopkins is here. Good morning, and with a cold. So thank you and gratitude for coming, not even feeling like your full and whole self.
I am not feeling like my full self, but at the same time, I think I look good. So,
Always.
Good morning, fam. So I'm Dr. Khalya Hopkins. I represent both New York City public schools and higher education. So I'm in the K to higher ed space. I'm also someone who works in CUNY. I work for Harvard. I am responsible for the development of the people who will then stand in front of our babies and hopefully teach them well. And so one of the things that, I have to like throw this in here. I'm a BX girl all day, every day. Shout out to Cardi. So yeah, it's a BX thing all day. But one of the things I am like furthering my learning in, because I'm a special educator by trade, racial justice warrior in the blood. But I would say that one of the books that really has kind of me thinking a little bit more is this book, I'm gonna hold it up, called The Unteachables by Keith A. Mays. And it really talks about the invention of special education and this notion of how special education was kind of birthed of this notion of like trying to put Black children in a space to contain them away from the general education setting, away from white children. And one of the questions that the author kind of poses that I think is important in this moment, says a historical question is, how was difference imposed on children and used against them as they entered the schools? Right. So difference is imposed upon us, upon our children, and then, yes, used against us and our children. So I hope that kind of starts the conversation around the state, the state of justice, that it was never just, to Lonice's point. And, that we have to kind of look at difference as something that we can leverage and not something that we punish people for. With that being said, I'm ready to talk my ish. You know what I mean? Look, Natalie, I didn't cuss. Look at me.
Dr. Hopkins and I have a cuss quota for the day. We'll see when it happens, but it'll be meaningful. Jeremy Chan-Kraushar, good morning. A pleasure to have you here with us. And if you want to introduce yourself and then make an offering to the group too.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It feels so good to be in community. We were speaking over the last couple of days about how, this is a day full of dread. It's a day full of a lot of anxiety for a lot of folks. And to start it with community, to start it with faces of people in space that I respect and admire so much is a blessing. So thank you, everybody. My name is Jeremy Chan-Kraushar. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a Chinese, white, Jewish, cis het man, an attorney, organizational policy strategist. I design professional learning with a lot of folks in the space as well, and I facilitate that learning. And I'm a former teacher of students with learning disabilities in New York City public schools, and also work for the Office of Equity and Access and a bunch of other really interesting, I think, creative grant-funded type programs in New York. And now I'm around the country trying to help out with educational equity. And something that I'm learning more about each day, especially over the last year or so, is the what. When it comes down to it, what does commitment to equity and justice mean, in particular when we are shielded by power and privilege, by the parts of our identities that we don't have to think about? Like, what does that risk look like in our relationships? And challenging myself every day and saying, okay, I could talk the talk, but what does walking the walk really look like? And reading, and as people who know me know, I really love history. And so what can we learn from people who have been in our shoes in the past, and how have we navigated these times before? And so that's what I'm challenging myself to do. And I offer for everyone, especially when we think about what parts of our identities, benefit from these systems, and how much are we feeling that discomfort? What does that mean to take on risk in our individual lives, even beyond fighting for our students?
Thank you, Jeremy. So you have 50% of your panel are lawyers, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing in this moment, but not to situate us in too much context, but I will offer, as a civil rights attorney, this is a particularly interesting moment in this country to be attempting to build justice literacy in our schools. And the reason for that, right, is that the attacks on this work have taken, significant legislative mechanisms into their tool belt, right? Getting folks to file lawsuits such that they go up to SCOTUS. We know that our Supreme Court is antagonistic to anything related to equity and justice in this moment. That is a very keen tactic being used right now. Similarly, situating folks from Moms for Liberty on our school boards and our, PEPs, right? All of our councils in different cities is a wise tactic, right? To move and combat and antagonize anyone who is attempting to move forward policy, practice, and relationship that is grounded in the values that we share for equity and for justice and liberation. And so with that in mind, what we'll do is we'll just start asking some questions, and the mix of folks in the room are K-12 folks, we have higher ed folks with us, we have folks who are in nonprofit spaces, foundations, work for organizations that are youth serving. So we're going to try to keep our conversation broad and also targeted at particular points so that everyone feels as if you're leaving with something you can take back to your respective spheres. But overall, I'll start with you, Lonice. How do justice literacy practices show up in our schools, in organizations? How do they show up?
Well, as a teacher, I can tell you that there are lots of classrooms across the city where they are showing up. They often show up with partners that schools collaborate with, school-based or community-based organizations that center the lives of students, whether it be about getting them internships or working during the summertime or just having spaces to be themselves. Unfortunately, I don't see enough of it being codified in classrooms, right? It's not part of curricula. It's not, it's not part of pedagogy that's pushed. And so teachers who are doing the work and see themselves as social justice warriors, if you're teaching Black and Brown students, you are a social justice warrior. That is your identity. And when you embrace that identity and you're doing the work to make sure that what happens in your classroom is meaningful and allows students to evolve and grow and develop and see themselves as problem solvers in the world, in their own lives and in the world, right? That's when it's happening. But that's not, that's teachers, that's educators spending their Saturdays and late nights during the week doing professional development so they know how to bring that back into their classrooms, right? I can tell you, the approach of using worksheets, right, where students are not thinking critically, the students are not creating, they're not delving into solutions, right? That is not what it looks like. And now as I woke up to, a whole bunch of articles from Chalkbeat and other places about what this is going to look like now once these Regents exams are gone. Looks like the Board of Regents are getting ready to vote. And so what happens then, right? It's an ample opportunity for classrooms to look differently, for schools to look different, right? The getting rid of Regents exams has impacts across the board, not only on pedagogy and practice, but also on scheduling, right? School schedules can look different. We can just reimagine our classrooms and have space for students to really delve deeply into content that allows them to problem solve and, do case studies. And there's so many opportunities. My concern is that we'll keep doing what we've been doing, and somehow, there'll be inequity baked into it, right? So how are we going to be intentional about making sure that this opportunity is a benefit for students who are currently, behind the curve, and have been, because, like we said earlier, this was the intention of this system. I'll stop there for now.
Dr. Hopkins, do you want to pop in next?
Sure. So I think that some of what this looks like is, and what we're seeing in certain schools is rebellion. We have shifted slightly, not slightly, I'm not even gonna mince words. We've shifted a lot in terms of what we used to say was our priorities. And of course, that comes with different administrations. People come in and, like, before everything, I remember about 6, 7 years ago, everything was Zaretta Hammond, right? We were all gung-ho. Everybody was over there getting their books, taking their pictures, doing the whole shebangy bang. And then it became, not that literacy is a problem. Of course it's not. I think Lonice made it very clear, right? We can't even be in terms of, like, working towards justice when kids can't read. But at the same time, I think we don't know how to hold the both and, right? Like, we don't stop talking about Zaretta Hammond. We don't stop talking about or practicing these things because now this is like the shift is to a particular type of curriculum or whatever. Those will come and go as well. But if your values stay your values, then there's a way that you're not shifting or moving with the wind or moving with whatever leadership is in town, because you've already made that commitment. So you do see in some schools where people have still stayed committed, right? And that looks a little rebellious. That looks like we're not necessarily going to implement said curriculum because that's doing harm to children. If that's their stance, right? If that's the stance that they're taking, then you will see that. And, in some ways we have our charges as people who work for New York City Public Schools, but I also got to respect the reason why people became educators, right? And it wasn't to necessarily just cram something down children's throats and say, oh, this is what might work, right? It may work. We don't even know what's happening yet. So let me see how politically correct I'm trying to be today. Okay, so The other part about this too is that we do have to come to conclusion too that there are a lot of leaders who are clout chasers. And I'm just going to say that for what it is, right? Like whatever game is in town, that's the game that people are playing. And so when it was cool to be a social justice warrior in the reckoning during 2020, everybody was doing it, right? It was like the best name brand outfit you could wear. And then the brand went out of style and people was like, oh, so what are we wearing today? And if we're not wearing that, then let me go wear something else and let me go figure out what that outfit is, because deep down I'm a clown, right? I don't actually believe in any of the things that was said 4 years ago. And I'm going to now shift gears. So I think that you're seeing like a hodgepodge of things happening right now as a result of, like, at different levels. I think you have the teachers who are having those conversations about race, about ability, about gender. You do have that about LGBTQ folks, right? Like that's important. But then you also have people who are untenured, right? Who don't have the same type of security. What does that mean when you're sitting in a classroom and you getting rated and you're scared that I'm not going to get rated effectively to even continue to fight? I might not even have my job next year to keep fighting. So I think there's a lot of different mechanisms at play. I do love the work that I'm doing with, I'm a special educator, but race is always infused in every one of my PLs, because that's a constant for me. I'm always a Black woman. I will never not be a Black woman. And so looking at students who are coming in Black and brown and predominantly in the community that I serve, I know that we can't dismiss identities from this conversation and just get to the curriculum, which may or may not represent them at all. So I think there is work happening. I think it does charge some people, but I also know that some people will go back when it's in vogue and then go back and put their fist t-shirts on and pretend with you and have, and do whatever it is that they think is going to get them, some clout. I don't even know if I answered that question, but I had to get that off my chest.
I think that was the answer we all needed. So yes. And before we, hopped on, of course, pre-panel, we were already panelizing and talking as a group and, watching the number in particular of white women in this moment who have latched on, right, to the next thing of reproductive rights and being, right, like their mechanism to show up to the polls. Listen, however we get there, we get there. And right, in this skin, the layers of accountability that I feel to everything that you just said, right? That's not trending. That doesn't trend, right? That doesn't come in waves. My commitment and what it looks like and the demonstration of my justice literacy or lack thereof has to show up all the time. It's not a sticker. It's not a symbol. It's not something, that I put on my social media. Like it's got to be me. And that I think is what has really shifted since we all thought after the execution of George Floyd that something had changed when in reality it was a gaslight. But Jeremy, let me come to you.
Yeah, I love that this is being talked about. I mean, a lot of folks are not, that's something that people kind of shy away from talking about for fear of people getting defensive. But I think we are shaking our heads because we know that to be true in a lot of ways. And it makes me think of how I'm interpreting this question around justice literacy, around policy and strategy, right? Like, and I think that's something where I'm growing, everyone it should be growing around. We don't have all of the answers, and now we're set with a set of circumstances that many of us foresaw, but haven't really lived through in the same way that it's playing out right now today. And so I'm thinking around, what does it mean to have the values that are aligned with CRSE, with equity, with justice, push ourselves to keep interrogating those beliefs that we have that aren't aligned with those values. Like that's deep personal work. And so I think those are practices that each of us need support in doing. I don't know a single person, not even folks who read books, who are experts that I want to talk to and just absorb all of their knowledge that have it figured out. Like that is constant work. And that's constantly looking at people who've been here before, who've done that. And I'm in my mind connecting it to like, what does that look like strategically? Every single organization I've ever been a part of, from an individual school that was its own world, that I didn't know anything beyond it, to the Department of Education, which was, it's this giant bureaucracy where people say, why are things continuing to happen the way that they happened under the last chancellor, and then the chancellor before that, and the last administration, right? So we think about things politically and strategically, no matter where we're placed in this work. And that's what I'm thinking about. Like that to me also is racial literacy, and that is justice literacy, knowing around, how can we partner and build coalitions and sometimes whisper and do things in quiet and then wait for our time. Like part of that is the work. And I'm thinking around whether you're a teacher in the classroom who might be the only person in your school that feels like you care about this work. How can you feel community and be connected and share the fruits of the incredible work that you're doing with community that's outside of your building, whether you're in a district superintendency and you're still trying to get those leaders above you to really commit to this work or be uncomfortable with this work. A lot of this too is around strategy and operating not in a reactive way, but in a strategic way to policies that are dictating what's possible and ultimately causing a lot of harm. So I really love, also back to what Lonice said, if we put students first and communities first, and we really, every day we wake up and we say, you know, there are folks who are suffering from harm that doesn't need to be happening, and I may have a little bit of power to strategize to move the needle in the right direction. I think that is, those are practices every day that reflect racial justice literacy that aren't even just about an election on one day. And I know we'll talk more about that.
And so Lanice and I will just bounce back and forth with some questions for y'all. We'll get through as many as we can because we had a ton. And then if folks are also curious about anything, if you pump questions into the chat, we'll make sure that we get to those too. So I'll pass it to you, Lanice.
I'm going to pass it back to you. Can you do the next?
Yeah, for sure. So when we think about you're right. So interesting question for us to think about, and I'll give my answer first, although it's not the answer to really set the tone. You know, what does it mean to foster spaces of safety when you yourself are not safe? And the reason it's interesting for me to ask this question is because I can't answer it. I'm always safe. The skin protects me always. And so let me say that again. Even you heard, for those of you that were on at the beginning, my introduction as a white Puerto Rican woman from the island of floating garbage, this skin, right, protects me in ways where I am always centered. And that's hard, right? That's hard to navigate as a human. That's hard to push other Latinx, Latina folk. That's hard to push other light-skinned folk, right? To be situated in the safety in which we are couched, whether or not we feel it. In this particular moment, though, the curiosity is the burden and the labor that particularly folks of color, but particularly Black women in this moment are doing to create these demanded spaces of safety and inclusivity, welcoming and affirming environments, right? All the language that we're used to hearing. What is that navigation when you yourself are not safe and each of you has already uplifted ways that in many facets, this work has gone underground in this moment, right? This work has become quiet in this moment. And I don't know how long that will have to be, but I know that that is very much where it is at in this moment for all the reasons you've named. So I'll open it up to any of y'all who want to pop in, but how do we think about safety when you yourself are not safe in a space?
I'll start. You know, I've been a teacher 26 years, and sometimes I had to close my door, right? And teach behind a closed door because whoever was leading the school I was in was not, you know, they had mindsets and philosophies and worldviews that were not aligned with mine. I've always taught Black and Latinx students. I've taught in East Harlem and South Bronx and the South Bronx. So they're the only places I've taught, and I've been intentional about that. I am from the Bronx. And so where I taught and who I taught, that I was very strategic about making sure that my gifts and my talents and the ways that I've been blessed, I've been able to then pass on to the next generation. I know I come from a people who have done that. And so, you know, closing that door kept me safe until the principal called the police on me, right? It kept me safe until, you know, it was just too much for her, right? And so I've learned as a professional, and I will pass this on to younger educators of color, that the way you stay safe is you are, when you're interviewing for that position, you're being interviewed, but you're also interviewing. And you want to make sure that whoever it is that you decide to work under is going to protect you. And that's literally the way I've stayed safe in these past, you know, maybe 15 years or so. I've worked for people who were represented white supremacy and were committed to bringing that into the South Bronx, into East Harlem, and to weaponizing their own identities and their privilege against our students. It's been real, right? I've seen, all of the things that we know about, right? Students being suspended because of the tone of their voices, and just all of the things that we know are true, and we try to stand between them, right? We're the educators who understand the way the system works and literally put our bodies between, between the system and our students. And so the way you make sure that you stay safe is you have to do your research, your background research on whoever it is you're interviewing with, to make sure that they are aligned, their mindsets are aligned with yours. And sometimes, they can have a mindset, but they are also working within the system of white supremacy, and they are also trying to get tenure, and they are also trying to protect, their jobs. And so you have to make sure that you know how to do a dance with the person who supervises you, so that, sometimes if sometimes you're a teacher and you're tenured and your boss is not tenured, right? And you can make arrangements where you'll stick your neck out when he or she cannot, right? So it is a dance, and we have to understand this is the most political system you will ever, right, that exists. It is. I started my career in politics. Education is far more political than politics. It is also part of what Khalya was talking about, the flavor of the week, right? Whoever is, we have a brand new chancellor, right? She'll have her own agenda that will be filtered down through superintendents, that will be right, that will end up somehow impacting what we do or how we're evaluated. Black teachers are more likely to be evaluated harshly, right, in ways that they, even upon appeal, they can't change, right? It has all kinds of ripple effects. So we have to know. Part of what you do in getting to know is you join networks. You make sure that you have safe spaces outside of where you work so that you can share information. If you have friends in schools who are doing things that you think you might want to do too, you find out like how it is they're doing that. How are they developing relationships with their administrators to make sure that they can continue to kind of be on a path to make things better for students. I've been able to bring to my school, because of the relationship that I have with my administrator, my students are taking my class for 3 credits at St. John's University, right? And I have convinced the school to pay for students to get these credits. Like, these are the ways that you can really have deep impacts. But you have to be protected, and you have to never be in a position of where you feel like you have to beg someone for your job. You want to walk in the room and make sure that whatever it is that you can offer, that they understand that you have talent and you have a gift and you have something that you can bring that will positively impact that school community. That's how you stay safe.
Dr. Hopkins, Jeremy, anybody that wants to pop in?
I was gonna go last, but Jeremy, you psyched me out. I was like,
no,
wait.
I'll go. You get the last word. Yeah, mine will be short because it's connected to Natalie's response too. I mean, and also just like hearing Lonice speak about your expertise and experience there, right? It's a different perspective than the one I'm bringing, and it's one that resonates deeply with me and connects to how I'm answering this, which is, right, it's not, oh, I'm never unsafe, but the word that comes to mind is relative safety, right? When I'm actually in community and I can understand that people's safety looks a lot differently then it pushes me to say, well, relatively speaking, what does that mean for my comfort and my safety? And what am I willing to risk to be more uncomfortable because I know that actually the repercussions aren't going to be as harsh on me, like the way I'm perceived. And I'm speaking directly to folks in the space that are white, that are East Asian, are white Jewish, right? There's parts of our identities that might feel like they are marginalized in certain ways, but what does relative safety look like? And how much do we not say because we're scared of the worst case scenario that we have never experienced before? And so I genuinely think deeply around how much are we pushing ourselves in the spaces where we do have influence, power, privilege to take in some of that discomfort. Oh, someone might see me a little differently. Oh, I might think they're going to target me, but really my job is a lot safer than I think it is. And that's relative safety when we think about the history of this work, the history of justice and equity. And if we're really about it, if we really believe in the full humanity of all of our students, we will take on the maximum risk that we are able to take. And I think for those of us in the identity, the relative privileges we have in our identities, we can push ourselves a lot further here. And I think that's just from like reading from people in the past, knowing that we have more power than we know we do, especially when we're perceived as not threatening and we're perceived as, oh, I'm actually going to listen to this person in the space. There's too many spaces where I've been looked at as, oh, Jeremy will say the thing because he gets it, but he's actually going to be able to be heard a little bit more. Like that is a hard thing to hear, but also one where if that's where I'm called to say the thing, to advocate in a way that might be better received, I'm going to do it. And I just wish more folks would wrestle with their relative safety in this conversation.
So thank you for talking about relative safety. And I think there's something to be said about Lonice's point around doing that dance, right? So I already know that as a Black woman, I'm not safe anyway. So there's a way that, given the fact that I know that, I'm going to make sure that I have to do the least amount of twerking as possible. I don't want to dance with everybody, right? I don't want to be in certain spaces that don't want me there. I don't want to engage with certain people who don't know how to engage with me. And I've experienced that, not a lot in my career. I've been kind of privileged in the sense that I've usually worked for people who understood who I was, what I brought to the table, and how I'm very much about talking about race. As a first year teacher, in the ninth grade, I was a high school teacher for ninth grade. My principal, love her down. She's still a principal, Dr. Bernadette Drysdale. We were creating our own curriculum, and my first year teaching, the theme was the year of isms, right? Racism, sexism, all this. And they let me go. I was 24 years old, and they let me go ahead and do what I needed to do and select the text that I wanted to select and do all the things that I wanted to do. And that was a place where I felt safe. You know what I mean? I felt safe taking risks as a teacher. I felt like I was someone who was respected, even though I was a first year. She was concerned about my students feeling safe, which were her students. She was like, as long as my students love you down, you know what I mean? Like, you can pretty much, I'll give you room to figure yourself out, right? As a teacher. But if you have that safety that you're creating, right? Because I'm not always safe, but I know how to create safety because I know what I would want. I know how I would like to be received in spaces. So I try to create that as much as possible. But I do think that one of the things that has been a savior for me, and now I'm gonna do a plug because Beyond Black History Month Collective, shout out to Kathleen, to Anyanwu, and to Nikiba and Natalie, right, for ensuring that that space exists. And there's probably people on this call who have been part of that, right? Where we got together twice a month to really talk about the ways that we were hurting in our respective spaces. The fact that we were under leadership, sometimes that was not recognizing our full humanity and the things that we felt was important. I am always going to be authentically myself. I don't know how else to be. These nails be clickety clacking everywhere, and I love that for me. And I'm not going to change that. If someone doesn't want me in their space, trust me, baby, the feeling is mutual. I don't want to be in your space either. So I think there's a way that, I know everybody doesn't hold that either, right? But I do know that you can't do the work that you're charged with doing. You can't create safety if your nervous system is crashing constantly. Mm-hmm. And I know for a fact that I have been in space where my nervous system was shot. And what did that do to me on a regular basis when I was trying to go out there and tell other educators, this is what we collectively need to do, right? And safety also looks like co-creation. one of the things that I even said to Kathleen, shout out to Kathleen, because I know she's in the chat, is that it is important for not only students, but also adult learners to be able to co-create their space, right? The fact is you always come in with an agenda. You always come in prepared, but you also come in ready to pivot. If somebody else has needs in that moment, then we have to go with where the group is. The group is not where your agenda is right now. And that's okay. You were planned, but you also can't stick to that plan if other people are having a crisis, right? Or whatever that case is. So we would always do these meaningful check-ins, check-ins that did not center the facilitator, check-ins that center the people who were participating. And those are the spaces that I like to be in. I love to be in spaces where if I'm the participant, how much voice did I have today? How much did I speak today? How much space was I given? Even if I didn't want to speak, was I given the opportunity to do so? And if I was not given that opportunity because the facilitator wants to hear themselves for God knows how long, right? And this is what we see in classrooms. Teachers who want to hear themselves. For some reason, they think they're smarter than the people they're sitting in front of or they're standing in front of. That's a huge issue for safety. If you think you're the only person who knows something because of age, because of whatever the case is, you are sadly mistaken. And there's a way that we are moving and we're replicating harm and we're making sure that people don't have voice because we need to be centered. And that's white supremacy because it's hierarchical. It's saying I'm the one in charge and you need to bow down and listen to what I have to say, even when I ain't talking about shit. Excuse me, that was one cuss. we're in one. But, I'm just saying, generally speaking, the safety has to be created by actually listening. That is a deep skill that most people lack. They're not listening to the people that they claim they serve. And I think safety, and I'm going to say this last one thing, I think safety also comes from understanding who you serve. Because I think people think, especially like leadership and stuff, they think that the person they serve is their boss. I don't serve my boss. I serve my students. I serve my community. I don't serve them. So when it's all said and done, if my students, if the adult learners that I work with feel safe with me, feel like they've learned something with me, feel like they've taken something that's going to push their work forward, then I have created safety. The safety is not only for myself. Ratings are part of the contract, but it's not part of my values. Those are two different things. There's contracts and there's values. You got a contract, they got to rate you, dope. Whatever that says is whatever that says. What I'm interested in is the feedback, the practice shifts, the things that have changed in people's pedagogies and their ways of moving and being in the world as a result of encountering and experiencing me. And that shows that there has been safety. All right, I'm done.
Okay, but no, please don't be done. Yeah, don't be done. Go ahead, Lonice.
I want to just add on to that when we really start to think about the practices that we use, right? When students are late to class, what happens? How many of us have witnessed teachers not let students in the room because they're late, right? Where does that come from? Why do we do? Well, I don't do it, but why is that done? Like, I think we have to really think about the spirit of what it is we're doing, right? Aside from assuming you're the authority in the room, you're the person with all of the brains in the room, you're the person who has all of the information and the knowledge in the room, we have to think about why we do what we do. Why do we throw kids out of class? Not we, again, but why do teachers throw kids out of class? What is that? Removing students who might be demonstrating some behavior that we don't want. And, as a teacher, I can acknowledge there can be such thing as disruptive behavior. But to remove students from the opportunity to learn, right? To somehow grow and evolve and develop. Why are we doing that? Why is that done? Where does it come from? So when we engage in this process of thinking about why we do what we do as practitioners, I think we can get to some clarity around preparing for this moment when there won't be tests, right? That center, right? What happens in a classroom. So what happens when we don't fall back on the Regents exam? And now we close the door and we're in the room with these kids. What are we doing if it's not about a Regents exam, right? Right. So that's what I want to add. We have to be very clear that a lot of our thinking, and we were raised as woke as we are. I say to people all of the time, I stop and question, what did I just say? Why am I thinking this? Where does this come from? Right? I was raised in this system too. I'm from here too. I was raised in the system, public school, K through 12. So part of it exists in my brain. And, I have to be intentional about shutting that off. Yesterday, it wasn't my student. He was a student of mine last year. But he said to me yesterday, we ran into me, and he said to me, I have a question for you, Miss Eversley. How many teachers do you know actually like students? Like like kids? That's what he said. How many teachers you know? And I said, wow, well, don't you think by virtue of the fact that we're teachers that we all like kids? He said, well, I know you like kids, but I'm just thinking. And that stayed with me for the rest of the day. What motivated this 10th grader to ask that question? Now, he's an expert in teachers, right? He's an expert. So he has a perspective, I guess, in general, that maybe teachers around him don't really like kids. Now, something is awry. Something is awry. So in doing whatever we're doing moving forward at this moment, where we're getting rid of Regents exams, that all has to change as well, right? Students cannot move through school feeling like the adults that are with them in the room don't actually like them. That's like teaching 101, right? Like the kids. Yoli would say, love the kids, right? Radical love.
May I add to that, Lonice? Because I think that was a point I was going to make later, but since you brought it up now, I'm just going to say it now. The idea too that when you look at a lot of like professional learning communities, or if you look at some of the PD offerings in schools, it is really a lot of adults trying to solve problems that they are actually creating. And to a certain extent, yes, you do need to solve the problem you created, but to a certain degree, like the person impacted by it has to be at the table to help you get to those solutions. And I think to your point about the student walking up to you and saying, do they like kids? I think about justice, like the state of justice in education is mostly centered around how are the students involved in that conversation. Because we talk about disproportionality of suspensions, disproportionality of pick a problem, right? But the thing is that everybody wants students to be social justice warriors out there. Go fight something over there. Go walk out because of something that happened somewhere else. But you got to dig where you stand. You understand what I'm saying? You got to dig where you stand. So if I see that the policies that in my school are causing my friends to get suspended constantly, and it's usually not over anything egregious, they're not like bringing in weapons. Most times the offenses are pretty low level. They're not like, oh, somebody literally threatened to shoot up the school, right? That's not even the usual problem. So the issue is that there are policies that are affecting kids daily that they're not even brought to the table to help make some solutions for. And I think that's criminal in its own right, right? Like, so here come a bunch of adults who are enacting policies and creating and sustaining policies that are harmful to children, and then they want to sit there and decide that they're the plug. We're gonna be the ones to figure it out, y'all. Like, no, if the kids are saying, I got sent, to your point, Lonice, I got suspended for being late 3 times in a row, whatever the case was. Why are we not interrogating or allowing them to interrogate the policy? Like most kids don't even know what their handbooks look like in schools. What are these handbooks that y'all keep? The chancellor's regs, the this and that. Why are we not unpacking that? And I haven't seen, so I'm not going to go ahead and say like I know what the civics for all looks like and all of these documents look like, because I have like a million and one things that I'm looking at, on a daily basis. But my question is that like we love to throw around things like chancellor's regs and this and that and what kids can do. Do they know what those regulations are? Do they know what's happening to them? And is there space for people to talk about that? And if there isn't space for kids to talk about that, then things are literally happening to them and not for them. And that needs to start with, again, dig where you stand. You are in this school. So before I walk out because of something that happened in the larger world, I might need to walk out of this place because this place is harmful. Maybe we should all stage a walkout because y'all trash. I don't know. I just think that generally speaking, I think we do need to like prep our students to look inward first and then start to move their advocacy outside. So yeah.
And that was actually going to be our next question. So I'm just going to reframe it a little bit. But can each of you give an example of where you have seen, worked with students, where they had the opportunity to be critical commentators on policies or practices that harm them? And while you think about your answer, I'll just offer we have kids writing equity policies with school board members in our districts. There's no reason why you can convince me as an attorney that a kid can't write a policy that they will then have to live and exist under. They get to hold their school and district accountable to that policy. We as parents, family members get to hold the school or district accountable to that policy, right? Policies also can't just sit on shelves. They have to be living documents. They have to live in practices that reflect the values that are written into them. So why wouldn't I want the very community that we serve to be a part of that? So it's absolutely possible. I just want to alert folks that there's a lot happening in the chat too, but then open it up to y'all for some actual, like we want to get real concrete, higher ed examples, K-12 examples of where you have seen students have the access to demonstrate Dr. Goldie Mohammed's criticality, that learning pursuit.
Well, my students actually right now, are preparing to debate about suspensions. And so they're gathering information, data. We watched a documentary about some youth activists in Oakland who were able to petition the school board to get changes made. So they are learning all kinds of information about the racialization, right, of these punitive approaches that schools are using. Oh, Dina says she saw it in my class. Yeah. So this is what's happening right now in my sociology class. But again, my sociology class is something that I negotiated with an administrator who I feel is protective of me so that students can dig into these kinds of issues and understand what justice really looks like and that they have voices.
Yeah, I'll have a short response is a little bit, that's great because I mean that's like on in the classroom level, and I'm thinking of like where a lot of my work is looking at a lot of schools, seeing a lot of different campuses, and one thing that comes to mind are whether it's an individual school or a district of schools committing to things like focus groups, committing to have external folks come in who are unaffiliated to get real feedback around how students are experiencing the school environment, and then using that report that comes back and actually tying it and aligning it to concrete change. And then also allowing students to know that they had a real say in what those changes were. And so I have had experiences with multiple schools, whether it's in California, Connecticut, New York, where they have said, we are committed to racial equity and justice, but what does that look like? We've actually invested in working with folks to do focus groups because we've asked a handful of students, but it's never been official in a way where people will feel safe saying how they feel, where there's an actual report from like a third party that says this is what the findings were at the school around curriculum, around discipline, around how students feel belonging in their schools, around how the teachers, educators, and administrators treat them and how they make them feel. You're not going to get real data on that unless you are committed to doing that work. And that doesn't have to just be with experts, right? We've also shout out to Competency Collaborative, and I know Joy Nolan was in the space. Like we used to have 50 to 75 schools together, and it was blowing people's minds away when we invited students into the space where leaders were, showing up to share best practices, where we said, everyone bring 3 students. And then we did panels in front of those leaders and asked them questions about grading practices and about classroom facilitation practices and about curriculum. And they were speaking and they were saying, no one ever asked me these questions. And so I think that's a way of looking at how do we share power with students and how do we do it in a systemic way and how do we actually make our commitments match our values instead of just saying, we'll just do the PD for our educators and hope it all changes. Back to what Dr. Khalya said and on Lonice, this is about our students. They need to be front and center, and they need to be not given, right? They need to be, that voice needs to be shared with them. And so those are some experiences I've had that have been inspiring. And I was like, I wish all schools would approach this work in that way.
I'll just add briefly, like, so my superintendent is in the chat and has brought up some of the things that the students, they have a student advisory council within the district, and they have worked towards, getting playgrounds, getting, pools, they, things that their community needs. But I do think in terms of, it's not just about the present, right? It's also about the legacy. And so what happens, and is there going to be any follow-up around the things that we created today? How does that impact the students who come into this community? Because I'll graduate, right? I'm a child, I'll leave here, I'll go somewhere else. But like what we left behind and what we fought so hard to get, what is the legacy of that for the students 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And is there any interest in circling back to the impact? Because I think a lot of times we're like, we're a culture that likes to point at things. Look what I did. Look, 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 right? And it's not always that there's been actual impact, but like, evidence, if you will, is always like, look what we got over there. We got new swings. Look what we got over there. We got a thing. But like in essence, when you put these things in place, it's also to have some sort of other, like there's supposed to be a residual impact of that. They're not just supposed to be like, I got a thing, look how pretty it is. It's also to say like, how has this improved my quality of life? How has this improved my experience as a student here? How has that made it feel more inclusive? Does my family even feel comfortable coming and using these facilities? Because there's sometimes where you'll put something new and shiny and, people are not even engaging with it. Like they're not even sure it's for them to a certain extent, right? And so I'm curious and I'm interested that once students do engage in these things that will hopefully outlast them, what is the impact of those things after they are gone? Because they won't be there. Like I mean, it's not to say they won't. Some people stay in their community and that's dope. I'm just saying that you won't use it in the same ways that you needed it when you were there. And or maybe you will. And that's also a long lasting like goal, right? To make sure that the same way I wanted this thing in fifth grade, I want it in when I'm 15, and when I want it when my children go to fifth grade, in this community. And so I think there just needs to be more long-term plans about things than just saying like, hey, we got the grant, we spent the money on this, picture, 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 you know what I mean? And then we forget about it, and that's that.
So I'm going to toss the next question out. And again, this grew from our rich conversations leading up to today. We all know about book bans, and I think we can all agree the agenda and intention behind book bans. We call them loud demonstrations of white supremacy, right? That's what a book ban is. But what are some of the quiet demonstrations of white supremacy that impact justice in schools? Natalie, I can start with, Khalya, you want to start?
I mean, I can, because I feel like I'm going to have to build off of some things that you all are going to say anyway, but I want to stay in the vein of the book bans, because I do think there's like the overt book ban and I think there's the covert book ban. And so without naming names, I'll say that curriculum choice has covertly, right, banned some books. And when I say ban some books, I'm not going to name a name of a curriculum. I'll just say that there are certain curriculum that have no full books as offerings, right? That children will never read a full text in their whole year, given that particular ELA curriculum, right? And so when you think about banning books, it doesn't have to be loud and like, oh, we're not going to let you read Huck Finn or whatever, whoever we're banning this week. But it's also embedded and baked into the way that the curriculum is designed, right? And so it almost happens right under your nose without you even knowing it's been banned, because you're just like accepting, for some people who have just decided to accept this prepackaged curriculum. You notice like one of the major conversations that I've had with a lot of school leaders is like, Khalya, there are no full books here. Like, and I'm just like, listen, no, there isn't, right? Right. And I think that has rubbed some folks the wrong way, especially when, we've read recently in the Atlantic that students coming into college have not been reading full length texts. And they're not almost able to. It's almost like it's way too much for them to go from start to finish. And, when you look at your own schooling, for majority of us, you were reading 2 full books almost a week, back in college, you know what I mean? And sweating and going through the motions. And so So I think that's really interesting to think about book bans in terms of how we are not always recognizing when it's happening, yet it's happening, and we're also like accessories to that, and thinking about where we go from there. But I'll let everybody else go because
And Khalya, I just want to. I think you just dropped a bomb in the room, right? I think New York City teachers don't realize that they are part of this book banning book banning approach that's happening, right? Like I said, it's not, it's not as loud, but it's happening, right? When students, because you're using a certain curriculum, are not reading full books, that is a form of book banning. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think I'm loving this living into this analogy of white supremacy at different volumes because I think, right, like to Kalia's point about curriculum, what we're witnessing are, and particularly in the Northeast and then California, where we do quite a bit of work, is the quieter book banning, the quieter curricular changes. So this is where we know that an angry parent has gone to a school board meeting and said, "Why is this book is gay in the course catalog?" And then all of a sudden it disappears from the course catalog and is no longer accessible to sixth graders, seventh graders, right? Where that text might actually save a life, right? When we think about the statistics, particularly for LGBTQ kids in this moment. And so it's not as loud as Oklahoma or Texas, but it's happening. And then if I think about white supremacy at different volumes, I am thinking about the systematic disinvestment in racial justice work, in equity work. We have states now who believe that you can talk about disproportionality without talking about race.
Yeah.
Y'all.
Yeah.
Let's try that again, right? Disproportionality is all about race and all of the intersections of our children's humanity. And so it's happening in a variety of ways and different paces. And I want to just reemphasize sort of the context that we started. All of these walkbacks and the pushbacks, right? And the quieter stuff has happened under the current administration. And so whatever the outcome, right, tomorrow or whenever we know the outcome, right, whatever the outcome is, there is work to be done because the walk back is real, right? And so I think that it's a question for those of us who are both willing and able to speak louder. This is the time to be louder, right? Angrier. We today are launching our Antagonize Injustice campaign. Literally, the word antagonize is to contradict, to counteract. That is the energy that we need in this moment because when things are happening so systematically through the legal system, on our school boards, quietly with curricular changes, right? And then you have superintendents who are wildly fearful about doing this work in this moment. And we are blessed to do this work in a few states like New York that have support from the State Board of Regents and from the State Department of Education, right? That does not exist in other places where you don't have an attorney general like Letitia James, who puts out a beautiful 40+ page document on the protection and affirmation of trans and gender expansive youth. How do you do this work to combat the volume of that practice of white supremacy? That requires those of us who sit in the skin to be louder, right? And so the walk back is real. And I think we could spend the rest of this panel talking about the examples, right? But curriculum alone, which we already knew was lacking in so many ways to elevate the criticality of young people, to have it be softened even more, to have texts that are the only way that some of our kiddos can see themselves reflected in what they're learning, knowing that here in the state of Connecticut, Black and brown babies do not see themselves reflected in the educators or leaders who serve them at wildly disproportionate levels. Across the country, we know that the vast majority of high school students will graduate public school never having been taught by a person of color, ever. We know that 2% of principals in this country are Black and male, right? Those are staggering numbers. And so our curriculum really matters. But the really concrete takeaway is where your curriculum lacks, where you don't have representation on staff, what are you doing? Because you can still do stuff. Set goals like 95% of the vendors who we partner with, of the performers, of the authors who come in will all be BIPOC. Set that as a goal and then hold yourself accountable. And I don't care what state you live in. It is absolutely possible. But you have to set those goals. We will sit with administrative teams and make them make lists of all the local BIPOC owned restaurants so that they don't order their next lunch from Panera. We should not be ordering from Panera. We should have a list. Where are the local businesses that are owned by the parents of babies who we serve? When I taught in Soundview in the Bronx years ago, every year I took my kindergartners to the local pizza shop and they let them make their own little individual pizzas. And then we went back and we did our nonfiction unit writing how-to books. But we specifically patronized a local business that was specifically owned by one of the babies from our school. That matters, y'all, and it's entirely possible. So we can combat the white supremacy that exists in both quiet and loud ways, and we have to.
Mic drop, mic drop, mic drop.
I was looking for the mics. We don't got no mic.
I know we need to add.
Like, yeah, they need the mic.
They need that, right? Mic drop.
Yeah, Natalie, oh my God, you put so much into words there that I was thinking, and I'm so glad you mentioned those things. Yeah, I mean, just think about one of the things you mentioned, which is around color evasiveness, color blindness, around institutional policy. The fact that, not to repeat what you said, but it's just the fact that this is seen as a choice. I just want to remind people, and I want to acknowledge that out of the folks in this space, maybe we don't know what happened in New York City public schools over the past, say, 5 years, right? Transitioning from a time where there was once a great deal of commitment, or at least stated commitment, around ensuring racial equity, around manifesting change in policy and mindsets, around even just something as simple as implicit bias awareness. That was confronted with a great deal of resistance. And while it was transformative in a lot of ways, in its foundational sense, where people were at least able to have conversations and acknowledge that each of us have implicit biases, that the next step was, can we have adult learning around what race and racism are? Like the fact that even in a time where there was institutional commitment from a state government, from a city government, that elected leaders put tens of millions of dollars into initiatives to support it. Like, just think of all that aligned in that time 3 or 4 years ago in New York City Department of Education, and that there are folks in the space here, including myself, that were deeply a part of that in the central offices, that dealt with resistance the entire time, and then all of a sudden, commitment seemed to just drop. It seemed to go away. And I think that directly is an answer to, what does it look like when white supremacy is more quiet? We can all stand there, and this is not to name names, but I saw a bunch of federal pushback to there was a GOP book banning support, and they got folks from Harvard and from the DOE, and there were folks speaking truthfully about the need to invest in equity and the need to talk about race. And I'm sitting here thinking, under those same people's watches, that stuff was not supported, and it has not been supported in multiple years, right? This is just a fact. It's not me being messy, right? The Office of Equity and Access, which was once 100 people in the New York City public schools, supporting 40 different districts. As of last year, the Office of Equity and Access is no more. There is no Office of Equity and Access in New York City public schools. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are incredible people continuing to do the work inside that are working their butts off, and we need those folks. And that institutional commitment is not there. And that is white supremacy. I don't even think that's quiet, right? That's a white dominant culture being paternalistic and hoarding power and saying, no, we have no need to even go beyond implicit bias awareness. Even when 99% of employees said that was actually really helpful, there's no need to give people information about what race is and what racism is. And so people can just go off of their misconceptions and cause harm. And that to me is unbelievable and really sad. And I think that's one place where we have a red line. You're in this work, we have a commitment to say we all need to learn about race and racism and the history of race and racism. Because if we don't, we're not even having the same conversation, and we can't move forward, right? It's just going to be the same small groups who know what we're talking about, know that this is important, and other people who are living in a la-la land, in a very harmful la-la land that we need to resist.
Can I add one more thing, Natalie, too? So in terms of this, the other covert ways, I think is, let's see how I can, okay. So another covert way is this emphasis that people are trying to make on data, which I think is really interesting. And I'm gonna expand what I mean by that. So like, in terms of like data, for example, everybody loves to sit there and point, like, give me the data on that, give me the data on that. And I'm gonna argue that, well, I'm not going to argue. Dr. Ruha Benjamin argues that this whole idea of like the datafication of injustice, it's like you go ahead and you keep on keep reusing the same data points, or collecting rather. Let's collect some data on that. We already know what the data says. It's been saying the same shit for like 10, 20, 30, 40, the history of this country, right? So when you're constantly trying to use data as a stall tactic, right? Like, let's just keep collecting because oh yeah, and we collected it, and the Black and brown children are still disproportionately ... not graduating, not passing their Regents exams, not being promoted, getting suspended. So like, how many times do we have to look at the same data point, which we've already seen 11 times? You know what I'm saying? We've seen that data. And I think that the idea that we look busy, because I swear to God, like, institutions love to be busy and not productive. Like they're so committed to looking busy. They're like, oh man, look what we did, charts. Like, I hate charts at this point. Like, I'm just like, please stop showing me a chart that already told me what I already knew this year, last year, and when I was a student. So I think the busyness of it and the data collection of things is very harmful to us, but it's seen as the work. It's seen as work. Oh, we're doing the work because look at the data and look at these charts, and let me put the charts on a slide so that you can also see it there. And like, let's take angles and let's do like selfies with the data. Like, there's no, like, the data is not going to change much if that's where we get stuck. And I think a lot of times we are so busy looking at a number that we're not getting to work. Like, by the time you actually look at how the calendar is set up and how much time you don't have, because I'm gonna say, like, we're already in November, we're off today. Well, I mean, we're in PD, there's a PD day, but like, we're off on that. We have Thanksgiving coming up, Christmas is coming up. When you start thinking about the actual days you have to make things happen, you don't have a lot of time. So the fact of the matter is, we know what we know already. How do we shift? And I think that we get stuck in the what and not like what's next. And I think that's how it's covert, because again, we have meetings. People love to have meetings about nothing, right? And then sit there and hold you hostage to meetings about nothing, where they show you the same thing they showed you last year, but in a different color. Like, I don't want to see them charts never again. Like you could just keep that off my radar, because I do think that it stalls all of our work. And the ones who would just like not just get to it, you do need data. No one's arguing the fact that it doesn't need to happen. But if there has been no significant change, there's nothing else we need to really collect anymore. We know what we know, and we need to move. And I think that is a very covert, for me, it's very overt. I think it's overt that people are like wasting your time regularly. I think that's like, and it's intentional. Be clear, people waste time because they really don't have an agenda. They don't, or that is the agenda, to waste your time so we don't get anything accomplished. And so I do feel like that is a lot of the ways that we are moving. That is just as bad as book bans, is just as bad as, right? Because you're really wasting human resources. There's all these people gathered who have things, who have gifts and talents and wisdom and knowledge and experience and all of this, and that you are literally wasting your human resources. That's wild. So yeah.
And that leads us, oh, go ahead, Lonice.
I think so as a teacher, and I've felt this for many years. The first school I taught in, we had a great community of teachers who were really advocates for students and really, got out of the way and let the students do their thing and solve problems and delve deeply. And we had great leadership. Since that time, I've been in schools where I've heard the words, "these kids can't." And I think that is the silent white supremacy, right? Because I'm the child of a 37-year paraprofessional in the Bronx who, every time we were on vacation, my mother was picking up seashells and books and, oh, these will be good for my kids. These will be good. Like, my mother never believed that her kids could not. And they were not these kids, those kids, they were her kids. And so that's been my sensibility as the child of an educator and then becoming an educator. First of all, I don't say these and those kids. These are mine. You're mine. You belong to me, right? I'm invested in this. And so when we use that language, that distance, that creates distance between us and the student, that's where that white supremacy lives.
This is the perfect segue that I think for the next question. And then we do want to make sure that we talk a little bit about what's happening today and how we all prepare for tomorrow before we open it up for all of your questions from participants or anyone that wants to share anything. Um, Schools and districts don't do a great job of cataloging what works well, right? You just spoke about your mom as an example. When we are using data, right, I want to know the story of what have you changed that has actually opened up access, right, to kids who didn't have access prior? What have you changed that has ignited a different type of criticality and skill set in the young people we serve based on changes that you made? And it's hard for folks to do that. And educators have a lot, and administrators are holding a lot in this moment. But if we aren't good at tracking what works and what's impactful and what students reflect back as, oh, you changed my experience here when you did this, then how can we ever measure whether we're doing right and that legacy that you brought up, Khalya, right earlier? So I wonder if y'all could talk a little bit about ways that you have seen schools, districts, campuses that are really working in support of the goals that we're talking about. And of course, you can add in examples where they're not. But I think if we could spend a couple minutes trying to uplift, some positive examples that you've seen where folks are actually saying, I can show the impact and here's why. I can draw the line directly to the folks who we serve. Anyone who wants to pop in.
I can think of a ton of educators who are, who are doing the work, investing in themselves, developing their networks, their group of co-conspirators who are exposing their students to opportunities to grow and evolve. I have colleagues, right on my staff, right, that I can work with. We talk about ways that we can work together. We can teach cross curriculum. So students are in my class talking about what they learned in civics. My colleague Catherine Torres, who's now planning co-planning with her students a protest around gun violence. So they are taking the lead. There are so many examples of great educators, but we do go back to a system that in large part does not support us, right? And so what we do, we're doing on our own time. We're giving up something to do this, to do this work. But it's being done. It's being done. There are tons of wonderful educators who are doing the work, and I'm proud that I stand next to them.
I'll just add from I love that, Lonice, and we're having such a deep, heavy conversation too that I appreciate the question to think about things that are working and people who deserve praise and flowers for doing this work in environments that are not conducive to this work and never have been. I want to shout out. There are people don't know this because it doesn't get talked about a lot. There are a lot of city governments, there are a lot of local governments, and even like regional governments who've committed to racial equity and justice in education in particular, and that allows for this work to at least have the possibility to happen. Right. The last thing I was talking about was in the last 5 years, all this roller coaster ride that even if you look at the example, the case study of New York City public schools has been for people who have been invested in racial equity and justice in schools, and how in certain pockets with certain superintendencies and districts, there has been the ability to opt in to this work, to hire consultants to come help, to hire people on board that really have a core value around this work and support administrators and educators who need a lot of assistance and support. It's not just going to happen because someone wrote a paper that says you need to do it, right? We all know that this is ongoing internal work. It's ongoing work we need support and guidance to do in terms of curriculum, in terms of policy, in terms of how we're connecting to our communities and students, all of those processes that just aren't there. That's just the traditional educational model, right? That will just keep chugging along in a way that causes harm, that continues to perpetuate the same outcomes, right? That what I want to call out is when there are pockets of leadership who allow for, at the very least, people to opt in without fear of retribution, that allows all the way down people to feel a little bit looser and able to be their best selves as educators, to do the amazing work that Lonice is talking about, that we need to highlight, I think, even better, folks who have made institutional commitments, even in the wake of George Floyd's murder, right? There are still a lot of localities and states and policies on the books that say we are committed to this, right? And so I think it's acknowledged that there is institutional commitment in places. Sometimes it's not mandatory, and a lot of the times the accountability structures have not matched, right, those commitments. But there is wiggle room that people have been able to play with to enable them to, engage their students as the agents of change and really do CRSE practices and create new curriculum that is not rigid and top down. And so that is happening in places, and want to shout out, different places who've elected leaders who said, I know that this might not be the most popular, but this is what we stand for. And it's allowed for some beautiful things to happen that we need, even now more than ever, to lean on those case studies, to learn about how it's happened in places so we can replicate it elsewhere.
So, all right, how do I answer this? I am usually the person who comes in when things are not dope. So you have to understand that, when you work for a district team or whatever the case is, like, you're here to support for those who are not at the space that sometimes people want them in. And I think a part of the difficult part of my job is that I don't get to see as many great things that I know are happening in certain spots because I'm too busy in triage, right? So I'm constantly like, oh, what classroom got the bullet wound? Let's go over there and patch that up. You know what I mean? So you don't really get to see some of the greater things. I will shout out PS 206 in East Harlem. Camille Forbes, Paul Forbes' sister, her school just had a IM project that they do where the Black children, Black girls get to really look at their who they are, their identity, their hair. They talk about their they're like working with like mannequins that have like hair on it, that they're like, this is how my hair looks, this is how my, so they're having these moments off the curriculum where they're like, listen, it is important that we affirm who you are, the fact that you're coming into these spaces, and we don't want you to change who you are to be here, right? And that also, not that you shouldn't change, you should love it. Like, this is a celebration of who you are, and we want to move in that space. I do think also that people do tend to stay in the identity portions of the 5 pursuits in terms of Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's work. I think that's the easier space to stay in some ways, and that's even if they get there. And I think that we do have this notion of joy as toxic positivity, where it's like, oh, we gonna just fail with a smile versus fail with a frown. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't want that to be the idea that joy is just smiling through failure, because that ain't it either. I do think that there's a need for more criticality, to your point, to everyone's point, right? And I, as a person who's in higher ed, who is preparing students to teach our children, right, and are going into New York City public schools largely, I'm the only Black teacher, the Black professor there in my division. So I teach a course called Learning Lab. There's about every year the amount of instructors shifts, but there's about 4 of us right now. I'm the only Black one. I'm always usually the only Black one. And I'm the only one who's actually bringing Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's work in, street data, all of these other texts that is not part of the curriculum, because everybody just only wants to look at Recipe for Reading, or they only want to look at, you know what I mean? Like, so it's very technical, and I'm all for technical pieces too, because you have to learn how to read. We're not going to argue that point, but if it's not coupled with this conversation around why the interest is low, why the engagement is low, why the rigor is not there, etc., right? If we're not having that conversation from a culture responsive lens, then and these are the kids, all the kids who are showing up to do this program, mostly are Black and brown students with an IEP. That is the point right there. And they usually have a classification of learning disability predominantly, or speech and language, right? Which is a whole nother conversation, because I don't think most of them even are appropriately, they don't even have IEPs really. I think it's just pedagogical malpractice. But needless to say, I will say that, like, I know I'm the only one next semester who's going to enforce that you have to do a certain number of lessons that focus on criticality. That's not part of the curriculum for higher ed. That's not what's being demanded of them. It's like, here, write these lesson plans, have a good day. And I'm trying to shift that, but you don't get but so many people in your class at the graduate level, right? So you're only talking to, say, a sliver of, like, you know what I mean? I've got like 10% of the program who have a different experience when they're experiencing me, but they're not having that experience across the board. And so we don't have it normed yet. And again, I'm an adjunct. I have a full-time job, right? I'm an adjunct. There's so many conversations I can even be a part of because it conflicts with my day job, right? So like I'm only there in the evenings to talk about what I think is important, what I think is going to push move the needle forward. But I do think that you do what you can. I think what I do is important. I think what the schools are doing is important. The leaders who are resisting is important, but we're so isolated in a lot of ways too, which makes it really hard to say, oh, I didn't even know you were doing that. Do you want to share these resources with me? Or I didn't even know that, because we don't have the time to really get together as much as we want to, which is why to Jeremy's point earlier around the community and like finding your people, I've gone out of my way to do that at times just because I need to know that I'm not on an island. You know what I mean? And even if I go back to my respective island, you know what I mean? We all can meet in the ocean and kiki for a little bit and then go back to our respective islands and feel, rejuvenated. So, yeah.
Oh, y'all are so awesome.
Oh, yes.
Listen, we're all going to meet in the island of floating garbage one day when we make it through whatever's happening. So we would be remiss to not talk about the day, right? This is election day, and I am going to say what I'm going to say, and I've already said it online. It is educational neglect to be unprepared for tomorrow. It is educational neglect to be unprepared for tomorrow. If you are a person who holds positional influence in an organization, in a school, in a district, on a campus, you need to plan for tomorrow and all of the possible realities, right? And I'll just name a few because there's a number of them, and I'm sure others I haven't even thought of, right? We may know which of the top two candidates has won by tomorrow. We may not know by tomorrow. We may find out in the middle of the day tomorrow, right? Has anyone considered the fact that you may be teaching on Thursday or Friday or another day, right? And that's when the alerts start coming in. We just don't know. And so we're going to need to have a number of plans, and we're going to need to focus on what our values are. And I've been saying this all the time, and I'll pump the piece that I wrote into the chat. What is the same for you right now that doesn't change tomorrow or in a week or in 2 weeks, regardless of the outcome of this presidential election and all of the subsequent elections that are going on? Hold on to the things that don't change for you. And then you need a preparedness plan for yourself for the rest of today, tonight, whether you are a person who is going to stay up and watch things on television. I believe that there is likely to be some violence and unrest in some capacity in the coming weeks. Each of us has a disparate relationship to violence. Some of us have experienced it directly, others have not. Others serve young people who have had direct experiences. How are we preparing ourselves for that reality? To not do it, and I said this jokingly to Lonice this morning, right? It's the elephant in the room. Yo, the elephant's like sitting on my lap right now, right? Like it couldn't be any more obvious. If you can predict it, you can prepare for it. We can predict some difficult times ahead. And we're already situated in a place where the state of justice is actually the state of injustice right now, right? That's the wrong title. It's the teaser title to this panel. So I'm wondering if each of you can make an offering for folks who are thinking about not just tomorrow, but the coming days, and any suggestions, wisdom that y'all have, both for each of us as humans, but then the spaces that we serve and influence.
I think we started speaking about this yesterday, even in our pre-meeting, right? I think we can't get comfortable no matter what happens, right? I think, you can't sit back and be like, okay, say, I mean, I got Kamala earrings on, y'all probably can't even see it, but they there. And let's say she loses or whatever, or let's say she wins tomorrow or whatever the case is, that is not an excuse for me to be like, woo, all right, now let me go look at my next nail design. Like, no, we still got to keep doing the work, like whatever that looks like, no matter who's sitting and where. I mean, and that goes from every level, from presidential right on down. When the chancellor switched over, you still got to do what you got to do. You still either believe in what you believe in or you don't. And I think that when people like, I follow KSA Lehman, I love him, I love all his work. And he said, like, I'm against whatever is the worst of white folks right now. Yes, Kamala has her issues, if that's but y'all not gonna get me to go against this black woman because I know the worst of white folks, and he is the worst of white folks. That is how that moves. So as far as I'm concerned, we still got to fight even more so if she wins the worst of white folks, because you think they acting up to pre-game, and they gonna act crazy post game. You know what I mean? And so I think that we have to be very vigilant and hold on to our people and get our communities gathered even quicker, and check in on each other even more regularly, regardless to the outcome. Because I feel like, we can't win sometimes even when we win. So, because it becomes just more problems for vulnerable populations. You know what I mean? So I don't want to, I want everybody to take care of themselves, whatever that looks like. If that means you calling out, tomorrow or Thursday or whatever the case is, that may be what it has to be, because these places aren't interested in you being well. I'm supposed to tomorrow. I said this to y'all after I got off the call, off a different call yesterday. We're expected to go into schools and start filling out some implementation visits in New York City, right? I'm supposed to be at a school tomorrow morning, looking at a checklist, after not knowing what might be happening tomorrow. How do you even stay in that pocket, right? How do you even stay in that mindset when you know that I'm biting these acrylics down to the nubs, you know what I mean? At that point, how am I supposed to focus? And again, I take pride in the work that I do, but it's like your brain is in a lot of different places, and to not acknowledge that the people who, and I'm tired of us being like, well, as the adults, you need to model and do this. No, as adults, you're a person. And as an adult person who this has real stake, we all have a real stake in this game. Like, I might have a meltdown. You don't know. You know what I mean? We don't know. And I can't sit here and try to, like, oh, keep it together. I got real families in my community who are going to be facing possible deportation or scared that they will. And I can't take that off the table and be like, well, where's your notebook? Where's your stuff? Like, what? Like, what? You know what I mean? I think that's wild that we are expected to go through business as usual under these circumstances, because either way, somebody's going to be disappointed. Some side is going to be disappointed tomorrow, and that has ramifications regardless. So I'm just like, I'm very interested in why it seems we can't pause for any, you know what I mean? Like that just seems very inhumane, and it just, I don't know. I'll let everyone else talk, but I just do feel like we are in a space where the work continues. The marathon continues, as Nipsey would say. Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Khalya, you're making me think existentially a little bit, and maybe this is something that could be helpful for folks, is how often do we think about even the last couple years, right? Like after the pandemic and what we've all kind of collectively been through. I know that's landed on each of us in different ways, but I think about, like, existentially, how have I changed as a human being over the last few years? After everything I learned, every book I learned, every conversation I learned, like, how does that actively change me or not change me, right? I could say, oh, I like reading books about this thing. I like committing to this. If I'm not changing how I show up in spaces, if I'm not changing, back to the original point, the risk I'm willing to take on in my own relationships, right? And I think there's a lot to say in terms of analyzing educational equity under the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, right? We could talk about how it's been, in some ways, it's been kind of like backwards in terms of how much people have been energized around this work. And I think that speaks to people's complacency, folks who are not directly impacted by the harms that exist every single day. A lot of folks let their guards down over the last 4 years. And that's just the reality. We've been talking about how these book bans have happened and people haven't come to the defense of the work that's really important because they haven't felt the need for it. So there's a twisted aspect of certain timeline that might happen in the next couple of days or up until next January. People might come and say, we need to do more of this work. And when in reality, I'm thinking of every single day over the last 4 years, in a lot of ways, has been harder in terms of educational equity. And that's just the truth. And obviously, there are lots of impacts in many other fields that are very heavy and have lots of weight. But I guess in responding to this existentially, I'm just thinking of how am I changing, right? Just in the personal, how have I changed after going through that pandemic and thinking about what my purpose is and understanding more around how the world is working in really harmful, negative ways. And then we could think about how have each of us shown up and kept our peace, but been vocal or not vocal in the last year around what our government has been okay with and what both parties seem to be okay with, right? That is deep. And that's for us to individually wrestle with and individually confront in our conversations with people we care about and love. Because I think deeply around there's people in our circles, and if they're willing to be pushed, which if we love each other, we should be willing to be pushed, right? Then it's up to us to use our energy and capacity to do that. It's at the point where people are unwilling and say, I don't have it's too uncomfortable for me to talk. And even though you have all this expertise, I got to distance myself from you. That's where I'm, individually trying to navigate, right? What that space is, where my energy is best used. But that's just how I'm thinking through this current moment, is thinking like, what are my values? How have I changed? And what does that mean every day, not just on election day? What does that mean on January 1st, regardless, right? What Dr. Khalya said and what Natalie said before, regardless of who is elected, because there are people suffering deep, deep harms from governments and systems that don't care about them at all, that say that their humanity doesn't matter as long as the majority of other people who are comfortable with humanity does matter. And that exists all of the freaking time. And I grew up not understanding that. So the more I know about that, what does that mean for who I am and how I show up in the world?
I'm thinking about my 12th graders, who some of them, might be on college campuses a year from now, might have roommates from different backgrounds. I I often think about, who was there on January 6th and who's related to them, and can my student, is it possible that my students can be roommates, right, in upstate New York with someone who was there or related to? So, my approach to supporting my students is just about, talking truth about what it means to be a person of color in this country at this time, specifically if you're Black or Latinx, right? And what it means to navigate spaces where there might not be many who look like you, and the value of finding your village, and making sure you have your co-conspirators, and that's how you navigate spaces. What Khalya talked about in terms of being the only Black adjunct professor. Like, once you're in the professional world and you're, person of color, that's often, right, our experiences. We're the only. And so many of our students don't know what that is. They haven't had to navigate the world in that way. So I think about that, because the reality is, we're encountering people who might be supporting a worldview and perspective that is about oppressing people who look like us. And so that's the conversation, right? My students know that my objective is to make sure that they find their power so that they can go out into this world and make the changes. I tell them all of the time, it's on you. It's up to y'all, because, sorry, you are inheriting such a mess, but it really is on you. And so that's where I am. I know we all, are dealing with nervous systems that have been compromised. The sleeping, the eating, the resting, all of that, right? We probably haven't really been doing much of that. But I think what we have to do is be clear that we have an opportunity to invest in young people, and that wherever we are now, this is not where we need to, we don't need to stay here, right? If our students our young people are developing the skills, we have to be invested in them so that they can make the changes that need to happen. I think I mentioned earlier, I'm fairly confident in the outcome of this race. I have friends who are canvassing in swing states, and they seem to be coming back with good news. But to your point, even that means there are implications to that, right? We saw under President Obama, a surge in violence against Black people, and so this is where we are. But I want us to also think about the possibilities and be encouraged by that.
Thank you for that, Lonice. I'm holding on to it because of you, with my coffee in the other hand and my angry and over caffeinated shirt, which is my mantra and just the state I exist in. But I don't see any questions in the chat or any hands up. This is our moment to hear if there. Oh, here we go. Got one. I spoke too soon, Jalissa. Are there any activities you recommend for high school teachers to conduct with students tomorrow? Lonice, Khalya.
I mean, I don't think so. I think sometimes we try to make things more complicated than they need to be. I think sometimes it's just a matter of holding space. And what does that mean to hold space for people? Because you have your own feelings, right? And these are all people who are, basically acting as containers right now for their feelings. But like, can there be a collective container where people can kind of and it doesn't mean that we have to agree on that. It doesn't mean we have to feel like, some people are gonna come in and be like, it worked out for me, you know what I mean? And some people are going to be in a different space, but I do think that you can't just be like, oh, well, let's just open the books to page 54 and let's do a close reading of, Catcher in the Rye. You know what I mean? Like we're not going to do that. You know what I mean? I think that that's not responsive at all, right? Because the thing is, like, if you see something happening, where they always say, if you see something, say something. But if you see something, you should respond accordingly. I think we even make cultural responsiveness too complicated.
Yeah.
You are seeing a thing and it is preventing children from being able to function, right? Your job is to make sure that they can function. So you're looking at, well, you seem all very riled up. Let's figure out how do we get back to a place where you feel heard, you feel like you can move forward, and you might not feel like you can move forward today. And that's okay. But there's knowing that we're not going to just act like you're not in crisis. That's wild. You know what I mean? So I think that the responsive part is really important. Like, even if you take off culturally and this and that, the responsive part will tell you what to do if you're indeed responding. And so I do think that you have to just see where people are. And even sometimes people don't even know where they are, right? Like they're just like kind of floating it, because this is going to be a really interesting space. So I just feel like you do have to just say, this is an opportunity to say anything you might need to say, take a moment for yourself. I think, we don't do enough, and this is maybe a different panel, but I don't think we do enough ritual in classrooms. And I don't mean it in the sense of like religious. I just mean ritual. Like, do we have space to be silent for 3 to 4 minutes? Do we have space to shout out our emotions and not just looking at, because again, people love charts, right? So look at that chart. Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you always want to point to a damn chart? Like, let people just talk. Like, I think that's because our natural state is to talk and to speak. Our natural state is not always to read and to write. But you know what I mean? Like, and that's not to say that those vehicles aren't necessary or not helpful. It just means that we just don't have enough ritual that kids know. You shouldn't even have to say, I'm gonna go out here and create a space. Kids should know they already have the space. The space is there, right? Now it's just like, this is what we're filling in the space today. And that will fill the space with something else, maybe tomorrow. But if you don't already have the space, then it does become difficult to navigate these things, because you haven't put it in and I don't even want to say as a system. I would say as a practice. Like, it's not a practice of yours. And that's something that we need to kind of move to. So yeah, I don't want to make it like activities. I just want, like, let the kids direct that space, right? What is it? Dr. Golden Muhammad says, we don't give children voice, right? They have it already. So like, are you just making space for them to use it?
The questions always pour in right at the last minute. I'm gonna have to
ask for forgiveness.
Oh, that we can't get to all of them, but I'm gonna uplift one that's in the chat because there are a number of facilitators who are consultants working in spaces supporting teachers. And I think this is a helpful question to get y'all's take on. What are the biggest things that consultants can do to offer support to the isolated work of social justice educators? What are some ways consultants make things worse for folks? Because we have a number of facilitators on the call. I think that's a great question. So, Jeremy, do you want to pop in on that one first?
Sure. Just a couple ideas are obviously when you're coming in from the outside, it's really hard to get a sense of the culture of an individual school, a district, a place. And so coming in, pretending like, right, like you know more than you do without asking lots of questions it's definitely something that could be harmful. It could make things worse in each of our own identities, right? Where we have to be aware of not knowing what a culture is and then giving lots of advice or feedback. So I think that's something that always is top of mind whenever I'm in a new place, a new school, and really trying to be genuine and vulnerable around my own experiences and not saying that, as a consultant, I have the answers, but showcasing and sharing things that have worked elsewhere is really helpful, making connections between people who are looking for guidance. And then one big thing is I think gets overlooked is validation. Like I remember when I was in a classroom and I said earlier, like that's the whole world I knew was my principal had all the power. My colleagues were the ones I trusted and cared about how they perceived me. I showed up for my students and families and did my absolute best when I was an educator and working, my tail off. And at times I didn't get validation. Like I didn't know if what I was doing was good enough. If I got a poor review or wasn't great at something, I was a perfectionist and I didn't have that validation. So as a consultant, I think uplifting people who are doing this work, in particular work that is hard around racial equity, that they know it and they're trying to be strategic and build coalitions in their building and change their curriculum and advocate for policy, all these beautiful things. I think as a consultant, we can lend our voices to validate and uplift and tell people that they are doing beautiful things, right? That they have a community outside of their buildings or outside of their district, and they are part of this work. And I think what's beautiful about this community and even just this conversation is when you meet folks who are about this work, it's not just a job, it's not just a consultant gig. We're like, you see me and I see you. And beyond this relationship where I'm a consultant in your building for a day or a week or a semester or a year or whatever, that like lean on me, reach out to me. Like we're now a connection. And that's one thing over the past, year and a half, 2 years, I left the Department of Education for almost 15 years and now have been on this journey of being a consultant and not knowing necessarily what that community looks like. And I just think that being able to say the work is what matters so much more than the individual project or the thing we're working on in the moment, and that you're connected for this, for life. Like this is part of our purpose. This is why we're here. That part is beautiful. And as consultants, I think we can uplift folks by saying, it's much bigger than the day-to-day struggles, right? You're part of something that means a lot even after we're gone. This is what we want our legacies to be about. I know Natalie said thinking a lot about legacy. I can sleep well at night when I feel like I'm part of a community that is making the world better, that we're speaking in spaces where other people are scared to say the thing.
Dr. Hopkins, did you want to pop in?
I think in terms of making things worse or helping, I think sometimes you got to know when to say no to a check. And that's a hard thing to say sometimes because everybody's not ready to do what they claim they're ready to do. And so sometimes you do have to leave money on the table, and that's because you are going to be depleted, and you're also going to make things worse for the people who are there. And I think that's something that is hard to say because, I mean, I don't worship money, but I know I need it. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I don't know if I need that money. I don't know if I need your, affiliation with you and whatever you got going on. That may not be helpful to moving the cause forward, right? Like, and I think that you do have to be wary of people who are, again, people like to point at things. We had Dr. Khalya come here and talk about race, and we had Natalie and Recent to talk about this. And people like to tell you those things as a way of escaping having to actually do the work anymore. Because if you think that because Natalie or Lonice or Jeremy showed up at your organization or school for 2 weeks at a time and you paid them a nice little check, that now you have somehow been transformed, that's wild child, right? Like that's crazy pants, right? That you think that that's what you are out here doing. Like, and I think people do that a lot where they like to point and they can write down, these are from 2023 to 24, we have folks in here talking about the things. And then next thing you know, everybody there is still a hostage. Everyone's there still trying to get up out of there. You know what I mean? Like the way you really know if a thing is working out, you got to speak to people outside of whoever monitors them, who supervises them and surveils them. That's how you really know. Because if I talk to the leader's going to tell me everything's well. Everything's swell. We did a great job. Then you talk to all these people who hiding out at the water cooler, hiding out in the bathroom, you know what I mean, whisper talking all the time. Like that tells you right there that your efforts, even though the check cleared, your efforts didn't do anything. And I think that's something that we want to make sure that as people who are working with schools or we want to see impact. But you can't see that if you're seeing turnover, if gossiping, if things like that are happening. We actually have not shifted anything. You know, we just have a consensus that these people are assholes. I mean, I think that okay, cool. We knew that before you walked in here, miss. So that's not neither here nor there. So I just think generally speaking, you know, you sometimes got to say no to certain things too.
I know Zaretta Hammond said that what she tends to do as a consultant is make sure that there's a sustainability plan in place with whatever entity she's working with. So before she goes in, she wants the district or the school or whomever to give her a sustainability plan so that she knows that the work that she's doing is not going to be a waste of her time or their time.
I love that. And we often talk about, you know, making sure that this work is not person specific, but it's role dependent. So that whoever the superintendent is, whoever the executive director is, right, it has become an embedded practice in the infrastructure and an expectation of anyone who comes in next. I am going to beg for forgiveness for the folks. There was a hand up, but we'll stay on for a couple extra minutes too. We also are giving you all of our contact information and a lot of resources. We are total book nerds. I'll just speak for all of us. So we've given you like what we're reading now and hoping to be in conversation with y'all. We're giving like impactful articles that we've written or read. Particularly want to uplift Fred Joseph's piece from his Substack. If you're not following Fred Joseph, you need to go right now. But this piece in particular really spoke to me and the feelings that we're all navigating in this moment. So check out the resource guard and I'll email that to you. For anyone who is eligible for CTLE credits, I'm also going to email you all that you need to do for that application. And just an offering to all of y'all, check on your folk who do this work in organizations. I can only speak for Recenter in this moment, but we may be closing our doors as of the end of this school year, if not sooner, because we have been hit financially. We have been hit with cyber attacks. People are unkind. The world is unkind and unwell, and it is very hard to do this work in a viable way. And I know I can speak for our entire consultant community of 20 racial justice strategists and coaches who are each feeling the same in all of their efforts with other organizations they lead and are a part of. And so our hope is that we get to the other side and that we lean on the ancestry we started this call on, even when we can't see what lies ahead, but we know how we get there and we know the values that we hold and the hands that we hold on that process. So thank you so much for everyone. As Jeremy said, we always make ourselves available and then folks never contact us. So we hope that you really do. But we know a bunch of y'all already in our community. And so thank you. Take care of yourselves. We're in for it. Whatever it is, I don't even know. But there's the elephant. Y'all are awesome. We'll hang out for a couple minutes. I'm going to stop the recording. And I want to say at about 12 o'clock on the nose, Khalya, you hit the cuss quota, which was 3. So you did it. You did it. Just
me being decent. I love that for me.
Great. Okay, let me